The antique mirror in the bridal suite reflected a woman Isabella Hawthorne barely recognized. The ivory silk gown had been custom-made in Paris, its flowing skirt and hand-sewn pearls catching the afternoon light from the tall, arched windows of Hawthorne Manor. A diamond tiara her grandmother's glimmered atop an elaborate opera nupto that had taken to stylists 3 hours to perfect. She looked every inch the perfect bride the society pages would fawn over, and she felt like a stranger in her own skin. A soft knock at the door made her stomach tighten. "Isabella, darling, it's time," came the voice of her father, Charles Hawthorne, a man whose name was synonymous with still, shipping, and unyielding ambition. This wedding was not a union of hearts. It was the sealing of the largest business merger of his career. Her role was simple: marry Edward Langford, heir to a vast shipping empire, and cement the alliance between their families. They had met exactly 3 times before today. Each meeting had been stiff, choreographed, and cold. Edward's eyes held calculation, not warmth. His compliments sounded like transactions. When he kissed her hand, she felt as though he were appraising the jewelry rather than the woman wearing it. "Just a moment, father," Isabella called, forcing her voice to sound calm, steady as though her heart weren't hammering against her ribs. She let her gaze roam the room, the same room she'd grown up in, though it felt like a museum curated by someone else. Silk wallpaper in muted gold, heavy antique furniture polished to a mirror sheen, oil portraits of severe-faced ancestors staring down from gilded frames. It was a prison dressed in elegance, and she had lived within its walls for 24 years. Outside, through the tall windows, she could see the sprawling gardens transformed for the occasion. White roses and ribbons adorned every archway. Rows of chairs, filled with 500 guests in their finest attire, fanned out across the manicured lawn. A string quartet played something refined and unobtrusive. Photographers positioned themselves to capture the perfect images for society magazines. It was a fairy tale wedding, just not her fairy tale. She took a long breath, feeling the weight of her gown and the weight of her decision pressing down together. It was now or never. Kicking off her silk shoes, Isabella crossed the room in quick strides, the hem of her gown whispering across the carpet. She opened the top drawer of her dresser and pulled out her car keys. Her hands trembled as she gathered the heavy skirts in both fists and slipped out the back door of the suite onto the servants' staircase, down the narrow stairs, through the empty service corridor. Out the kitchen door she moved like someone in a dream. The garage smelled faintly of motor oil and cedar. Her silver sports car gleamed under the dim light, an object that belonged more to her father's collection than to her. She didn't care. She slid behind the wheel, her pulse thrumming, and started the engine. By the time anyone noticed she was gone, she would be miles away. The rain began as she reached the highway. At first, just a few scattered drops across the windshield. Then the clouds opened, and the sky poured down in sheets. The windshield wipers struggled to keep pace, swiping furiously against the deluge. Her wedding dress, now bunched awkwardly round her legs, made it difficult to operate the pedals. She hunched forward, peering into the gray curtain of rain, following the winding country roads, without a destination in mind, only a way. Somewhere behind her, guests would be murmuring, wondering at the delay. Charles would be summoning his security team. Edward would be irritated, perhaps embarrassed, and the whispers, the scandal, would already be starting. The thought should have filled her with dread. Instead, she felt something else. Freedom. But freedom came with a price. As dusk settled and the storm worsened, the road slickened into a treacherous ribbon. Lightning forked across the sky, illuminating the black silhouettes of pine trees. Thunder followed, so loud it seemed to rattle the frame of the car. She rounded a sharp curve and hit standing water. The tires lost grip. The steering wheel spun under her hands. She fought it, heart lurching into her throat. But the car skidded sideways, veered off the road, and slammed into a tree with a metallic screech and the shatter of glass. For a moment, she sat in stunned silence, rain drumming on the crumpled roof. Her head throbbed. She tasted blood on her lip, but she was alive. The cars had hissed steam, mingled beyond repair. She reached for her phone. No signal. The road was empty. The storm, relentless. Through the downpour, she spotted a faint amber glow in the distance, a light, warm and steady, coming from somewhere deep among the trees. With no other option, she shoved open the door and stepped into the mud. The cold soaked instantly through the layers of silk and satin, dragging the hem of her gown down like an anchor. She lifted the skirts and stumbled toward the light, branches clawing at the fabric. She was sinking into the wet earth. The source revealed itself as a large wooden workshop, its paint weathered and its windows aglow. A sign above the door read, "Mercer's Fine Woodworking." Through the glass, she saw workbenches cluttered with chisels, planes, and pieces of furniture in various stages of creation. Lanterns hung from the rafters, their golden light making the air inside look impossibly warm. She hesitated at the door. She had never in her life knocked on a stranger's door to ask for help. All her needs had always been arranged by assistants or family staff. But now, soaked to the bone, shivering, alone, she had no choice. She knocked once, lightly. When there was no answer, she knocked again louder. The door opened. The man who stood there took her breath away. Tall, broad-shouldered, with dark hair that fell across his forehead and brown eyes that held a quiet steadiness. His flannel shirt was worn soft, his jeans faded, his hands strong, calloused, real look as though they had shaped every piece of wood behind him. "Good Lord," he said, taking in her disheveled state. "Are you hurt? What happened?" I had an accident," she managed, her teeth chattering. "I'm sorry to bother you, but I didn't know where else to go." "Don't apologize." Without hesitation, he stepped aside. "Come in before you freeze." She crossed the threshold, the warmth hitting her like a physical embrace. The scent of wood shavings, linseed oil, and something faintly sweet from a kettle on the stove wrapped around her senses. "I'm Daniel Mercer," he said as he closed the door. Isabella paused. This was her chance to be someone other than Isabella Hawthorne, the society heiress whose life had been mapped out since birth. "Emma," she said. "Emma Carter." Daniel nodded and draped a towel over her shoulders, then guided her to a chair near a small wood-burning stove. "Well, Emma Carter," he said with a half-smile, "let's get you warmed up. We'll worry about your car afterward." As she sat, she let her gaze wander over the room. Every piece of furniture bore the mark of careful, loving work, a Victorian dining table gleaming under fresh polish, an antique rocking chair with intricate carvings along its arms. On a nearby workbench sat a half-finished jewelry box, the green of the wood catching the lantern light. "This is beautiful work," she said, running her fingers lightly over the smooth surface of the box. Daniel's expression softened. "It's just a hobby that got out of hand. I used to work construction. After my wife passed, I needed something quieter, something I could do while taking care of my daughter." "You have a daughter?" "Lily. She's 7. She's staying with my sister tonight, or she'd be here peppering you with questions by now." Isabella smiled, really smiled for the first time in days. There was something about him that made her feel safe, seen, not as a pawn or an ornament, but simply as a human being who needed help. "I don't know how to thank you," she said quietly. "You don't need to. Just get warm." He poured coffee into a sturdy ceramic mug and placed it in her hands. "So, Emma Carter, what brings you out here in a wedding dress during the worst storm of the year?" She took a sip, feeling the heat spread through her chest. For the first time, she was sitting with someone who knew nothing about the Hawthorne name, nothing about her father's wealth or the marriage she had just abandoned. "It's a long story," she said. "I've got all night," Daniel replied, and she believed him. Outside, the storm raged on, but inside the workshop, surrounded by the scent of cedar and the glow of lantern light, Isabella now Emma felt something she had never known before, the possibility of belonging. 3 weeks passed since the night the storm brought Isabella Hawthorne, now Emma Carter, to Daniel Mercer's door. In that time, she had woven herself into the rhythm of his and Lily's lives so seamlessly, astonished even her. What began as cautious gratitude had blossomed into something warmer, something steady. Mornings had a particular kind of magic here. Emma would rise early to the faint scent of coffee drifting from the kitchen, the muffled hum of Daniel's radio playing an old folk station. Lily's cheerful chatter floated down the hallway as she got ready for school. By the second week, Lily had started asking Emma to braid her honey gold hair. At first, Emma's fingers fumbled with the strands, but the little girl was endlessly patient, sitting still on a stool while Emma learned. One morning, Lily beamed at her in the mirror. "You're getting really good at this, Miss Emma." "Is that so?" Emma said, feigning surprise. "I suppose I'll need to charge for my services." Lily giggled. "I'll pay you in cookies." It was the sort of easy warmth Emma had never known with children, having grown up in a home where affection was neatly wrapped and delivered only on special occasions, never spontaneous, never messy. Every afternoon, Lily would burst into the workshop after school, dropping her backpack with a thud, eager to show off her latest creation or story. One day she came in with a paper flower crown. "Mrs. Peters taught us to make them in our class. Here, this is for you." Emma knelt so Lily could place the crown on her head. "It's beautiful, sweetheart. I'll treasure it forever." Daniel watched from his workbench, pausing in his sanding. In the warm glow of the lanterns, with Lily giggling and Emma smiling, the air in the shop felt fuller, alive in a way it hadn't been in years. Since Catherine's death, he hadn't realized how quiet his world had grown, or how much it needed voices like these. Emma found herself drawn to the work itself. It started with simple tasks, holding pieces steady, while Daniel joined them, dusting off a newly finished surface. But soon she was learning to sand, to apply stain, to polish the wood until it glowed. Her hands, once soft from a life of careful preservation, now bore faint calluses. She didn't mind. There was satisfaction in seeing a piece come back to life beneath her fingers. "You don't have to do this," Daniel told her one afternoon as she carefully applied a coat of finish to a restored dining chair. "I want to," she said. "I've never done anything useful with my hands before. It feels good." Her words were honest, though incomplete. The truth was, this place, the hum of work, the scent of sawdust and linseed, all felt more like home than any marble hole she had grown up in. Daniel began to notice her eye for detail. One day, as they examined an antique secretary desk, she traced the inlay with her fingertips. "The proportions are perfect. And look here, dovetail joints. Original. This is master craftsmanship." He looked at her, a flicker of surprise in his eyes. "You really do know your antiques. Most people wouldn't spot that." Emma hesitated. "My guardian was a collector. I picked up more than I realized." Her voice was casual, but her pulse skipped. Every slip toward her past was a risk. "Well," Daniel said, "his loss is my gain. You're a natural at this." Their eyes met for a moment longer than necessary. Emma felt something stir deep in her chest, uninvited, but impossible to ignore. Evenings were often spent on the porch once Lily had gone to bed. One night, the air was warm and fragrant with honeysuckle from the garden Catherine had planted years before. Fireflies blinked in the tall grass beyond the porch light. Emma's gaze wandered to a photograph visible through the living room window, a smiling woman with Lily's eyes, framed in gold. "Tell me about her," Emma said softly. Daniel was quiet at first, the weight of memory evident in his posture. But then he spoke. "Catherine was the most alive person I've ever known. She could make an ordinary Tuesday feel like a holiday. I met her in a coffee shop. She was grading papers. I was buried in construction plans. I kept glancing over until she finally said, 'Are you going to keep staring? Or buy me another coffee?'" Emma laughed quietly. "She sounds wonderful." "She was," he said simply. His eyes softened as they met hers. "I never thought I'd feel that way about anyone again. But these past few weeks with you here, I've started to remember what it's like to look forward to tomorrow." The air between them shifted. Emma's heart raced. She wanted to tell him the truth, her name, her past, the life she had fled. But she also knew that truth could shatter everything they had built. Instead, she whispered, "I think I'm falling in love with you too." And when he leaned in to kiss her, the warmth of it, tender, real, made her feel more alive than she ever had in her 24 years. The morning after their kiss still hummed in Emma's mind like a song she couldn't stop replaying. She moved through breakfast in a quiet haze, aware of Daniel's nearness in a way she hadn't been before. His hand brushed hers as he passed the coffee. His gaze lingered a fraction longer when she smiled. It felt fragile and thrilling, as though something new had taken root between them overnight. Daniel's phone rang mid-morning, the sharp tone cutting through the soft whir of the sander. He glanced at the screen, frowned in concentration, and answered. Mercer's fine woodworking, yes. This is he. Emma, dusting off a newly finished tabletop, only half listened until his expression changed, interest sparking in his eyes. An estate collection, he repeated. Yes, I've done restorations for auction before, antique identification too, yes. Well, I know someone with a sharp eye for that sort of thing. His gaze flicked toward her then. When he hung up, he crossed the room, excitement clear in his voice. That was Ellsworth & Co. Auction House. They've been asked to handle the liquidation of an old family estate, and they want me to evaluate the furniture for restoration potential. But here's the kicker, they also need someone with an eye for historical value. Emma felt her stomach tighten. I told them I have just the person, he said, smiling. Will you come with me? We'd make a good team. Your knowledge, my restoration skills, could be great for business. Her first instinct was to refuse. Public settings were dangerous. One wrong glance, one face from her old life, and the entire facade would crumble. But the hope in his expression made it impossible to say no. Of course I'll help, she said, pushing down the knees curling in her chest. When do they want us? Tomorrow morning. Emma, this could change everything. Having you as a partner could open doors I never dreamed of. Partner. The word landed like a warm weight in her chest and a cold one. She wanted to be his partner in every sense. But partners didn't lie, and she was still living inside the biggest lie of her life. That night, Emma lay in the small guest room that had long since become hers, staring at the ceiling. She imagined a future where she and Daniel worked side by side, where Lily grew up with her in the picture, where the truth of her past was nothing but a footnote. But she also imagined the moment Daniel would find out and the way his eyes might harden with betrayal. The thought made her chest ache. Still, she wasn't ready to give up this life. Not yet. The morning of the estate sale dawned bright and deceptively peaceful. Daniel loaded his truck with toolkits, reference books, and rolls of protective cloth. You look pale, he observed as she came out to meet him. Are you sure you're feeling all right? Nervous, she admitted. I've grown used to our quiet life here. He smiled. We'll be back by afternoon. Lily hugged them both before heading off with Daniel's sister. Bring me back something pretty, Miss Emma. Emma's throat tightened at the girl's trust. She had no idea how deeply Lily had worked her way into her heart. The drive to the Ellsworth estate carried them past manicured lawns and stone gates, the kind of neighborhoods that made Emma's pulse quicken for the wrong reasons. It was too close to the world she had left behind, too reminiscent of everything she had run from. The estate itself was a stately Georgian colonial, dignified, but not ostentatious. Ancient oaks lined the driveway, their branches tangled high above. Two black sedans sat parked near the entrance, their tinted windows and government plates sending a bolt of unease down her spine. Daniel didn't notice her reaction. Looks like we're not the only ones interested, he said lightly. Mrs. Ellsworth herself greeted them at the door, a gracious woman with silver hair and eyes that still held a spark of mischief. Mr. Mercer, Miss Carter, thank you for coming on such short notice, she said. My late husband was quite the collector, but I'm afraid the family must sell quickly. We're hoping to identify anything that truly belongs in a museum before it's too late. She led them through room after room of treasures, Chippendale chairs, Chinese porcelain, carved desks with delicate marquetry. Emma's trained eye picked out pieces of extraordinary value almost immediately. She was leaning over a finely crafted writing desk when she heard a voice behind her, a voice that froze her blood. Mrs. Ellsworth, I'll need to speak with anyone who's been given access to these items before the sale. Her breath caught. She knew that voice. Turning would confirm it. but she didn't have to. Martin Cole, her father's head of security, stepped into the room. He'd been a constant shadow during her life as Isabella Hawthorne, always there at galas, charity events, even family holidays, and he would recognize her instantly. Their eyes met. Recognition flickered in his. Cole and certain. Miss Carter, isn't it? His tone was polite, but there was steel beneath it. I believe we need to have a conversation. Daniel looked between them, confused. I'm sorry, do you know each other? Oh, we know each other very well, Cole said smoothly, though I suspect Mr. Mercer doesn't know Miss Carter as well as he thinks. Emma's pulse roared in her ears. The room felt smaller. Cole reached into his pocket, pulling out his phone, and turned the screen toward Daniel. The image was one Emma had hoped never to see again, her official engagement portrait with Edward Langford, taken mere days before she'd run. She stood in a sapphire gown, family jewels at her throat, every inch the wealthiest. Emma Carter doesn't exist, Cole said evenly. This is Isabella Hawthorne, daughter of Charles Hawthorne. She disappeared 6 weeks ago from her own engagement party. Daniel's face drained of color as he looked from the photograph to her. She could see the moment the truth landed, and the way hurt began to settle in his eyes. Isabella Hawthorne, he said slowly. The Hawthorne fortune. The papers said you'd been kidnapped. I wasn't kidnapped, she said quietly. I left. I couldn't marry Edward Langford. And instead, you came here, played house with the small-town carpenter and his daughter. Was this all just a game to you? His voice was sharp, cutting in a way she'd never heard from him before. No, everything I felt, everything between us, it was real. I love you. I love Lily. This life, built on lies, Daniel interrupted. She took a step toward him. He backed away. Cole cleared his throat. Your father is waiting outside. He's been very concerned. And then Charles Hawthorne filled the doorway, tall, silver-haired, dressed in a suit that probably cost more than Daniel made in months. His presence carried the weight of command, his gaze assessing Daniel in a single sweep. Isabella, he said, voice tight but relieved. Thank God you're safe. I've been safe, she replied, standing straighter. Charles looked at Daniel again. Thank you for taking care of my daughter. Though I imagine you had no idea who she really was. Daniel's voice was cold. No, I didn't. And if I had, I never would have gotten involved. The words hit her harder than any confrontation with her father could have. The room felt colder, though the air was still heavy with the scent of polished wood and aged paper. Isabella stood between two worlds, one represented by her father's looming figure in the doorway, the other by Daniel, his expression hard and unreadable. Charles Hawthorne's voice carried the unyielding authority she had known her whole life. Isabella, we need to go. Edward has been remarkably understanding given the circumstances. The wedding can still happen. The merger is far too important to abandon over a momentary lapse in judgment. Lapse in judgment. The words landed like a slap. She lifted her chin. Father, I don't love Edward Langford. I never have. I will not marry him, not for you, not for the business. Charles's gaze narrowed, his blue eyes like ice over steel. Love, he said, almost with disdain, is a fleeting indulgence. Marriage is about alliance, stability, ensuring the legacy of our name. You were raised to understand this. I was raised to be an asset, Isabella said, her voice sharper now, a pawn in whatever move benefited the Hawthorne empire. But I'm not doing it anymore. For a long moment, her father said nothing. The silence stretched, heavy and oppressive. Then he stepped further into the room, his eyes sweeping the space until they landed once more on Daniel. And this is your alternative? His tone dripped with skepticism. A man who works with his hands for a living, who lives in a house smaller than your dressing room. Do you truly believe you belong in this existence? Something in Daniel's jaw tightened, but he didn't speak. Isabella took a step toward her father, heat rising in her chest. I belong where I'm respected, where I'm more than a name on a marriage contract. Daniel has shown me more honesty in a few weeks than I've seen in a lifetime. Hawthorne Manor. Daniel's gaze flicked to hers at that, but there was no softening in his eyes, only a guardedness she couldn't break through. Charles exhaled slowly, as though reining in his temper. This isn't a discussion. You will come with me now, and we will put this embarrassment behind us. You'll be married before month's end, and this detour will be forgotten. No, she said simply. The words seemed to hang in the air, shocking in its defiance. Charles's face hardened. You've always had a flair for dramatics, Isabella. But this isn't a play. This is your future. You will not throw it away on some fantasy of independence. Her pulse pounded in her ears, but her voice didn't waver. It's not independence I'm choosing. It's myself. She turned then, seeking Daniel's eyes, needing him to understand, to see that what she felt for him was real. But he didn't step forward, didn't say her name. Instead, his arms were crossed over his chest, his expression unreadable. It's a little late for speeches about honesty, isn't it? He said quietly. The words struck harder than her father's commands. Daniel, she began, but he shook his head. You lied about who you were. Every day, every moment, you let me believe in someone who didn't exist. Do you have any idea what that feels like? Her throat tightened. Everything between us was real. My name, my past, yes, I hid them. But what I feel for you, for Lily, that's the truth. He held her gaze for a long moment, and she hoped she saw something flicker there. But then he looked away. Charles moved toward her. Isabella, the car is waiting. The pull of her old life pressed in on her, heavy and suffocating. But she didn't move. I can't go back, she said, her voice low but steady. Not to the life you planned for me. Her father's expression turned cold in a way she hadn't seen since childhood. Then you're no longer my concern, he said. You want to be cut off on your own? So be it. The finality in his tone sent a shiver down her spine. But she stood her ground. Without another glance at Daniel, Charles turned on his heel and left the room, Cole following silently behind. When the sound of their footsteps faded, the silence that replaced it was worse. Daniel leaned against the edge of the workbench, his arms still folded. So Isabella Hawthorne, she winced. Please don't what? Use your real name? His voice was sharper now, the hurt breaking through. You had so many chances to tell me the truth. Why didn't you? I was afraid, she admitted. Afraid you'd see me differently. Afraid you'd think I couldn't be part of your life, of Lily's life, if you knew where I came from. You were right, he said flatly. The words hit like a blow, knocking the air from her lungs. I need some time, he continued, his gaze dropping to the floor. To think, to figure out what's real in all of this, if anything is. Her hands curled into fists at her sides, not in anger, but to keep from reaching for him. Daniel, please. But he shook his head again, and something in his posture told her the conversation was over. She swallowed hard, fighting the sting in her eyes. If you need time, I'll give it to you. But I meant what I said. I love you. That hasn't changed. He didn't answer. Emma, no. Isabella walked past him, out the door, and into the sunlight that suddenly felt too bright. The gravel crunched under her shoes as she made her way down the long driveway, the weight of everything pressing against her chest. She didn't know where she was going, only that, for the first time in her life, both of the worlds she tried to live in felt impossibly far away. The next few days blurred into one long stretch of aimless hours for Isabella. She left the Ellsworth estate without looking back, walking until she reached a rural bus stop. Her father's black sedans were nowhere in sight, but the sense of being watched lingered like a shadow at her back. She took the first bus heading anywhere, a creaking, half-empty vehicle that smelled faintly of gasoline and rain. The ride carried her through small towns she didn't recognize, past rolling fields and weathered barns, until she stepped off in a place that felt removed from both the opulence of her upbringing and the quiet familiarity of Daniel's workshop. The motel. The motel was a squat, aging structure tucked between a diner and a boarded-up hardware store. The carpet smelled faintly of mildew, the wallpaper curling at the corners. But the door locked, the shower worked, and for now, that was enough. She paid in cash, using the emergency stash she'd hidden in the lining of her coat, Before the wedding that wasn't. She had maybe 2 weeks before it ran out. That first night, she lay awake staring at the water-stained ceiling, the motel's ancient heater clicking softly in the corner. It wasn't the absence of luxury that gnawed at her. She didn't miss the silk sheets or the marble bathrooms. It was the absence of Daniel's voice in the next room, of Lily's laughter, of the quiet hum of the workshop lanterns. She had walked away from her father's world without hesitation. Walking away from Daniel had felt like being ripped out of her own skin. Daniel's days in the workshop, Daniel worked later than ever, the sound of the sander, and the smell of varnish his only company. Lily noticed the difference immediately. "Is Miss Emmer coming back?" she asked one morning as he braided her hair for school. "I don't know, Buck," he said quietly. Lily frowned, tilting her head to look at him in the mirror. "You miss her." He didn't answer, but the silence was enough for Lily to know she was right. Daniel had told himself he needed time to think, to separate the truth from the lies. But the space she'd left behind only made him realize how quickly she had become part of their lives. The mug she favored still sat in the sink. Her sweater still hung on the peg by the door. He found himself glancing toward the porch in the evenings, half expecting her to step into view. The diner. By the third day in the motel, Isabella found herself in the small diner next door. The waitress, a kind-eyed woman named Carla, refilled her coffee without asking, sliding a plate of toast across the counter. "You look like you're running from something," Carla said casually, though her tone held no judgment. "Maybe I am," Isabella replied, managing a faint smile. "Well," Carla said, "whatever it is, you're welcome to sit here as long as you need. We get plenty of folks passing through, some staying longer than they planned." It wasn't much, but it was the first gesture of kindness she'd received since leaving Daniel. An empty phone. Her phone sat face down on the motel nightstand. She hadn't turned it on since the day at the estate. Part of her was afraid of the messages she might find from her father, from Edward, maybe even from the press. But the bigger fear was the absence of a message from Daniel. She imagined him deciding she wasn't worth the risk, that everything they'd shared could be reduced to a handful of weeks, and then dismissed. The thought cut deeper than she wanted to admit. Daniel's dilemma. By the 5th night, Daniel was restless. He sat at the kitchen table long after Lily had gone to bed, staring at the phone in his hand. He'd typed her number twice, deleted it twice. He told himself it was pride, that she should be the one to explain herself, to fight for what they had. But the truth was murkier, tangled with anger, yes, but also a stubborn hope that she might walk back through his door on her own. When he finally set the phone down, the ache in his chest felt heavier than before. The job offer. On the 7th morning, Carla from the diner slid a piece of paper across Isabella's booth. "Local antique shop needs part-time help," she said. "You've got the look of someone who knows her way around old things." Isabella hesitated. "I've had some experience." "Then go talk to them," Carla said, as if it were that simple. And maybe it was, because an hour later, Isabella found herself in a dusty little shop filled with furniture that reminded her painfully of the workshop. The owner, a weary man named Frank, looked her over, asked a few questions about dovetail joints and finish restoration, then nodded. "Start tomorrow," he said. Daniel hears a rumor. The same afternoon, Daniel stopped by the hardware store in town. While he was paying, the clerk mentioned something offhand. "Hey, isn't that lady who was staying with you working over at Frank's now? Came in this morning for some polish." Daniel froze. It took him a full minute to answer. "Yeah," he said finally, his voice neutral. "I know her." But the truth was, he didn't know what to do with the information, whether to go to her, to demand answers, or to let her have the space she seemed to want. That night, he stood on the porch long after the sun went down, the cool air brushing against his skin, wondering which choice would hurt less. The bell above the antique shop's door chimed as Isabella stepped inside with her hands full of a newly polished candlestick set. Frank, the owner, gave her a nod from behind the counter without looking up from the ledger. It was mid-afternoon. quiet except for the soft tick of a grandfather clock in the corner. The scent of lemon oil and old wood hung in the air. Isabella had just placed the candlesticks in the display case when she felt that shift in the air, that awareness of being watched. She turned. Daniel stood just inside the doorway. For a heartbeat, neither of them spoke. He looked almost exactly as she remembered, flannel shirt rolled to the elbows, hair slightly tousled from the wind. But there was something in his expression she couldn't quite name. Not the raw anger from the day at the estate, but not forgiveness either. She found her voice first. Daniel. He didn't move closer. Frank told me you were working here. Her fingers curled against her palm. I needed something to do, somewhere to be. His gaze flicked briefly to the counter, then back to her. You could have come back. The words were simple, but the weight in them made her throat tighten. I didn't think you wanted me to. I didn't know what I wanted, he admitted. Still don't, if I'm honest. Frank, sensing the tension, muttered something about checking the stockroom and slipped through the door at the back, leaving them alone. Daniel took a step closer, his voice lower now. I was angry. Still am. Maybe. You lied to me, Isabella. She flinched at the name, at the way it landed between them like a wall. I know, and I'm sorry. I should have told you from the start. Why didn't you? She swallowed. Because I didn't want to lose what we had before it even began. I've spent my whole life being someone else's bargaining chip. When I walked into your workshop that night, I wanted just once to be seen as me. Daniel's jaw worked, but he didn't interrupt. She took that as permission to go on. I didn't plan to stay. I thought I'd be gone in a day or two. But then Lily braided her hair and showed me her drawings. You taught me how to sand a tabletop. I started to feel home, and the longer I stayed, the harder it became to say the words that would break that. His eyes softened, but only slightly. You think the truth would have broken it, but the lies did. She closed her eyes briefly. I know. The clock in the corner ticked on, marking the silence that followed. Finally, Daniel spoke again. Lily asks about you every day. Her breath caught. How is she? Confused. She doesn't understand why you left. I told her you had something important to take care of. I didn't want her to think you just walked away. Tears stung her eyes. I didn't. Not from her. Not from you. Then why are you still here? His voice was quiet now, almost wary. Because I'm afraid you'll still send me away, she thought, but didn't say it aloud. Instead, she said, because I wanted to give you space. And maybe because I needed to prove to myself that I can stand without my father's money. Without the Hawthorne name. I don't want you to think I'm here, because I have nowhere else to go. Daniel studied her for a long moment, then nodded slightly. Fair enough. He turned as if to leave, then hesitated. We're having dinner at the house tomorrow. Just me and Lily. If you want to come, it's not a promise of anything. Just dinner. Her heart leapt, though she kept her tone steady. I'd like that. When he left, the bell above the door jingled softly, leaving her standing in the stillness of the shop. It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was a door, and she intended to walk through it. The following evening, Isabella stood at the edge of Daniel's driveway, hands tucked into the pockets of her coat, heart beating in an uneven rhythm. The workshop lights glowed in the fading daylight, casting the familiar golden hue she'd once associated with safety. She hadn't been here since the day everything had fallen apart. Taking a breath, she walked up the steps and knocked lightly on the door. It opened almost immediately. Lily stood there, her face breaking into a smile that made Isabella's chest ache. Miss Emmer, the little girl squealed, launching forward to wrap her arms round Isabella's waist. Isabella knelt, hugging her tightly. Hey, sweetheart, I've missed you so much. I thought you weren't coming back, Lily said into her coat. I had some things to figure out, Isabella admitted softly, brushing a strand of hair from Lily's face. But I'm here now. Behind them, Daniel cleared his throat. Dinner's almost ready. His tone was neutral, but he stepped aside to let her in. She hung her coat on the peg by the door, her old spot, and followed them into the kitchen. The table was set simply: roasted chicken, potatoes, green beans, a pitcher of water, and a small vase with a sprig of rosemary sat in the center. Lily chattered through most of the meal, filling in every detail of her week at school, from a spelling bee to a playground game that had ended in a dramatic dispute over the rules. Isabella listened intently, asking questions, laughing when Lily did, grateful for the easy way children could bridge gaps adults struggled to cross. Daniel mostly listened, but every so often, Isabella caught his gaze lingering, thoughtful, measuring. After dinner, Lily excused herself to finish a drawing for art class, leaving them alone in the kitchen. Isabella began stacking plates, but Daniel shook his head. "Leave it. I'll take care of it later." She hesitated, then said quietly, "Thank you for inviting me." He leaned back against the counter, arms folded. "Lily missed you. I didn't want her to think you just disappeared." "I wouldn't do that to her," Isabella said quickly. His eyes searched hers. "And me?" The question was blunt, and for a moment she couldn't find her voice. "I wouldn't do that to you either, but I thought maybe you needed me gone." Daniel exhaled slowly, the edge in his expression softening. "I was angry. Still am, in some ways. But I've also had time to think. You lied about your name, your past, that's not small. But I can't deny that you were honest in other ways. With Lily, with the way you worked here, with how you made this place feel different." Her throat tightened. "I never lied about how I felt." He nodded once, as though he believed her. "That's why you're here tonight." They moved into the living room. Lily curled on the floor with her colored pencils, Isabella and Daniel sitting on opposite ends of the couch. It wasn't the easy closeness they'd shared before, but it was something a step toward the middle. At one point, Lily brought over her drawing, a picture of the three of them standing in front of the workshop, all smiling. She'd drawn the tallest figure, Daniel holding hands with the smaller ones on either side. "It's us," she said proudly. Daniel's eyes flicked to Isabella's before he smiled at Lily. "It's perfect." Later, when Isabella stood to leave, Lily hugged her again, clinging a little tighter this time. "You'll come back, right?" "I will," Isabella promised. Soon, as she stepped onto the porch, Daniel followed her out. The night air was cool, the scent of pine and sawdust lingering. "I'm not saying everything's fine," he said quietly, "but I'm willing to see where this goes. If you are." Her answer was immediate. "I am." It wasn't forgiveness yet, but it was a beginning. The next week, Isabella returned to the workshop for the first time in what felt like a lifetime. Daniel was bent over a workbench, planing the edge of an oak cabinet door. He looked up when she entered, his expression unreadable for a moment before he set the tool down. "Morning," he said simply. "Morning," she replied, shrugging off her coat. "Lily said you were working on the cabinet for the Ellisons. Thought I might help with the finishing." He hesitated just long enough for her to notice, then nodded. "There's sandpaper in the drawer. You remember the technique." She did, and as she worked slow, even strokes along the grain, the familiar scent of sawdust and wood polish wrapped around her like an old quilt. Finding the old rhythm, by mid-morning, they'd fallen into a quiet rhythm that felt almost like before. He measured, she sanded, he clamped pieces, she fetched tools. Every so often, their hands brushed when they reached for the same thing, and each time, the air between them shifted slightly. At lunch, they sat at the small table by the stove. Daniel poured coffee into her mug without asking, just like he used to. "Frank says you're doing good work at the shop," he said. She smiled faintly. "It's not the same as here." His eyes lingered on her a moment before he took a sip. "It's good to see you here again." The call. That afternoon, Lily burst into the workshop after school, her cheeks flushed from the cold. "Miss Emmer, we're doing a wood project in art class, and I told Mrs. Green you could help." Isabella laughed, setting down her brush. "I'd love to." "What are we making?" "A birdhouse," Lily said proudly. Daniel's smile was small, but genuine as he watched them talk. Lily already pulling Isabella toward the supply shelf. It was the most alive he'd seen his daughter since everything had unraveled. But the warmth was interrupted by the ring of the workshop phone. Daniel answered, his face shifting as he listened. When he hung up, his jaw was tight. That was the delivery company. They dropped the Ellison cabinet at the wrong house, and the people aren't answering the door. If it's left outside in this weather, the finish could be ruined. The drive. I'll go with you, Isabella said before she could think. The address was 20 minutes away on the other side of town. The ride was quiet at first, the hum of the truck engine filling the space between them. But as they turned onto a narrow country road, the sky darkened unexpectedly. Within minutes, freezing rain began to fall, coating the windshield in a thin, slick sheen. Daniel slowed, his hands steady on the wheel. The truck's headlights caught a flash of movement, a deer darting into the road. Daniel swerved instinctively. The tires skidded on the ice, the truck spinning halfway before coming to a stop in the gravel shoulder. For a heartbeat, neither of them moved. You okay? He asked, his voice low but urgent. She nodded, her pulse still racing. You, yeah, what almost was. The rain ticked against the roof as they sat there, breathing hard. Daniel's hands tightened on the steering wheel, then loosened again. I don't want to waste more time being angry at you, he said finally, his voice rough. That call hearing you say you come with me. And then, this he gestured vaguely toward the road. I realized how fast it can all be gone. Her chest ached at the raw honesty in his tone. I'm not asking you to forget what I did, she said softly. But I'm here because I want to be, not because I have to, not because I've got nowhere else. He turned to look at her fully then, and in his eyes, she saw the shift, the guardedness easing, the hurt making room for something else. Back home, they reached the misdelivered cabinet without further incident, loaded it carefully, and brought it back to the workshop. By the time they were done, the rain had stopped, replaced by a faint winter mist curling through the trees. Inside, Lily was at the kitchen table, drawing. She looked up as they walked in. You're both wet, she said matter-of-factly. Daniel smiled faintly. Yeah, but we're fine. Isabella caught his glance as he said it, the words meaning more than they sounded. The morning after their icy detour, Isabella woke earlier than usual. She stood at the small window of her motel room, watching the pale winter light creep across the parking lot. Something about the near accident had changed the air between her and Daniel. It wasn't full forgiveness, but it felt like the start of one. When she arrived at the workshop later that day, Daniel was already there, his flannel sleeves rolled, a fine dusting of sawdust on his forearms. He glanced up from the lathe. Coffee's on the stove, he said. It was the smallest gesture, but it felt like an invitation. Routine returns. By mid-morning, they'd settled into work. Isabella sanded a table leg while Daniel shaped its twin. The old rhythm was there again, tentative but real. At lunch, Lily burst in, her hair windblown from recess. Miss Emmer, can we make cookies tonight? She asked. Daniel glanced at Isabella, and for the first time in weeks, his smile reached his eyes. If she says yes, I'll even help clean up. I'll hold you to that, Isabella teased. The phone call. Late in the afternoon, the workshop phone rang. Daniel answered, his brow furrowing almost immediately. When he hung up, his jaw was set. That was your father, he said flatly. Isabella froze. He called here. Daniel nodded. Told me you were making a mistake, that you belong in the life he gave you. Said I should send you back before you ruin both our futures. Her stomach twisted. What did you say? That I don't take orders from men who think their daughters are property. His voice was calm, but there was steel underneath, and that you're not going anywhere unless you want to. A shift in the air. She didn't realize she'd been holding her breath until it came out in a rush. You didn't have to. I know, he interrupted, but I wanted to. If you stay here, it's going to be on your terms, not his. Something in her loosened at that. It wasn't just the words, it was the fact that he'd said them to Charles Hawthorne, a man who can make most people fold with a single look. Cookies and conversations. That evening, the three of them gathered in the kitchen. Lily measured sugar with exaggerated precision, Daniel cracked eggs, and Isabella stirred the batter. The air was warm with the scent of vanilla and melting chocolate. Halfway through, Lily looked up. "Miss Emma, will you be here for Christmas?" Isabella hesitated, glancing at Daniel. He met her eyes. "I hope so," he said simply. And just like that, she knew her answer. "Yes," she told Lily, "I'll be here." The first test. 2 days later, Frank from the antique shop asked if she could attend a regional auction with him. "Good chance to make contacts," he said. Her first instinct was to refuse. Public spaces still felt dangerous, but Daniel surprised her. "You should go," he said. "If you want to stay here, you need to live your life, not hide from it." The idea scared her, but the fact that he wanted her to step out into the open felt like another piece of trust falling back into place. She agreed. What it means to stay. That night, as she left the workshop, Daniel walked her to her car. "I'm not promising I'll never be angry about the way this started," he said. "But I'm not letting your past be the thing that decides your future. Not if you don't want it to." Her throat tightened. "I don't." He nodded, stepping back. "Then we'll figure it out, one day at a time." The morning of the auction dawned brittle and bright, the kind of cold where the air almost crackled when you breathed it in. Isabella stood in front of the mirror in her motel room, fastening the last button on her navy dress. It wasn't the elaborate couture she'd once worn to society events. It was simple, professional, chosen entirely by her. No stylist had approved it. No assistant had laid it out. Her hair was pinned in a loose twist, a few tendrils escaping to soften the line of her jaw. She fastened the small pearl studs Lily had given her the week before for luck, and felt a pang at the thought of the little girl's earnest face when she handed them over. Frank's truck pulled up outside in a rattle of gravel, and she took one last steadying breath before locking the door behind her. The regional auction was held in a converted train depot, its high brick walls hung with gilt-framed paintings and iron sconces. Long tables displayed rows of porcelain, silver, and rare books, while the far end of the hall showcased furniture under the glare of overhead spotlights. The air was filled with a low murmur, dealers greeting each other, buyers assessing items, the occasional clink of glass under careful hands. Isabella inhaled the familiar mix of lemon oil, aged wood, and the faint metallic tang of old coins. For the first half hour, she kept her focus on the work. She noted the fine proportions of a Regency sideboard, the elegant curvature of a Queen Anne chair. She jotted down details for Frank, pointing out hidden value that might be missed by less discerning eyes. It almost felt safe. "Isabella," her pen froze mid-note, the voice smooth, confident, unmistakable, cut through the hum of the room like a thread snapping. She turned slowly. Edward Blanford stood 3 paces away, his winter gray suit perfectly tailored, his expression a mixture of curiosity and irritation. His eyes flicked over her, taking in the plain dress, the absence of glittering jewelry, the small notepad in her hand. "I thought it was you," he said, his smile tight. "Your father's been beside himself. Do you have any idea what you've put everyone through?" Months ago, she might have flinched, defaulting to polite deference. But not now. "I know exactly what I did," she said evenly. "And I'm not going back, Edward." He arched a brow. "You think you can just vanish into this?" His gaze slid toward Frank, who was speaking with another dealer nearby. "This small life, with a man who can't give you what you deserve." She almost laughed. "What I deserve? For the first time in my life, I have exactly what I deserve: respect, honesty, and a choice." She didn't see Daniel come in at first. Frank had called him earlier about a delivery schedule change, asking if he could collect a few purchased items. By the time she noticed him, he was already crossing the room, eyes locked on hers. His gaze flicked briefly to Edward, taking in the way he stood to see everything. Edward turned, offering a "Danny." Edward's expression tightened. Daniel stepped closer, just enough to stand between them without be. The last 2 words landed with quiet certainty. Edward's eyes narrowed, but he recognized a fight he couldn't win here. The hum of "You didn't have to do that." Daniel glanced. The truck's heater hummed as they drove. You could have told me he might be there, Daniel said after a W. He kept his eyes on the road. Her throat tightened at. A week later, she moved out of the motel. There weren't many boxes, just clothes, books, a few keepsakes, but Lily darted between them with an excitement that made Isabella's chest ache. Does this mean you? Daniel looked at her over Lily's head, waiting for her answer. Yeah, Isabella said softly. It does. Snow sifted past the workshop windows, each flake catching in the light before vanishing into the drifts below. Lily tore into her presence with gleeful abandon, pausing only to hand Isabella a small, neatly wrapped package. Inside was a single key. Daniel leaned against the doorway, arms crossed loosely, figured it was time to make it official. She closed her fingers around the key, the cool metal warming quickly in her palm. Daniel, he shook his head. You don't owe me a speech. You've been choosing us every day since you came back. This is me choosing you, without conditions. Her response was simple. She crossed the room and kissed him. It wasn't rushed, wasn't tentative. It was slow, steady, the kind that carried the weight of everything unsaid and everything promised. When they pulled back, Lily was grinning at them from the floor. Does this mean we're a family now? Daniel smiled. Yeah, Bug, I think it does. The workshop thrummed with life. Orders came in faster than they could fill them, thanks to Isabella's antique expertise drawing in clients from 3 counties over. She handled the business side, Daniel worked the restoration, and Lily supervised from her homework perch on the workbench. Their home theirs was warm with the scent of wood polish and fresh bread. Daniel still burned the toast at least once a week. Isabella still teased him about it, and Lily still drew them all in crayon with the same 3 smiling faces. Some evenings, when the tolls were put away and the lights were low, Daniel and Isabella would sit on the porch with mugs of tea, watching the fireflies in summer or the snow in winter. No formalities, no contracts, just a life they'd built, messy, honest, and theirs. It wasn't the life she'd been born into. It was the life she had chosen, and the life that, finally, had chosen her back.